So Alex, whenever you're ready, here we go.
All right. Oh, one last thing I did forget to tell you. So you know the sorry, I should have mentioned. Sorry, you know these the beats that are like these ones. I'm not playing those as like 30-second notes into eighth notes perfectly. I'm just playing them like instead. If that makes sense. All right. All good. Oh my goodness.
Very nice. Thanks, Alex. Great to hear you play. Okay, so let's talk a few particular things about this piece, and I'll try and draw some parallels between that and just kind of Baroque music in general, so that you can kind of take it and apply it to some of your other repertoire, and I think it'll apply to some of the other movements as well. Let's actually, would you mind playing just the first two lines up until that F natural, just one more time?
Sure.
Good, nice, excellent. Could you just talk me through what your concept of those first, what is it, 6 bars is? You know, what are we hearing right now? What is it formally? What is it melodically?
I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea.
Okay, so this is just a very typical Vivaldi opener for a concerto. We hear, you know, a very distinct theme, the da 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 da, and it repeats over and over. And then in bar 4, what happens there is there's this what eventually becomes Fortspinnen, where there's just a circle of fifths progression. And you can see that you have the bass line in your part. The F sharp goes down to the B, goes up to the E, down to the A, and back to the D. So it's all this sequential movement just to basically really hammer home that Vivaldi wants you to hear the da-da-da, da-da-da part. You know, the entire ensemble is playing this. You're playing it as a soloist. And it's really all we hear in the first few bars. So play it one more time and just see if you can play it in a way that emphasizes that that little figure, but also try and create some variety with it. You know, Vivaldi's not trying to say the exact same thing with every time he does the figure, but he's trying to switch it up a little bit, whether it's because we just heard it, so a second time repeat, maybe you play it different, or it's over a different harmony. So what does that different harmony mean when you apply it to that figure? No wrong answers for this. So just give it a shot. See what comes up.
Okay.
Good. Nice. Excellent. Thinking about measure 4 and 5. So those are 4 different harmonies, and then it finally comes back to the tonic in measure 6. We'll probably be talking about this a lot today, but I want to get this concept of strong and weak kind of going in your mind. And this is something for everyone. So for a pluck string instrument, maybe you've talked about this in your classical guitar training, but the idea of training our fingers so that each finger is strong enough to do a scale and is fast enough to do a scale, and they all sound fluid. And that's kind of the way 19th and 20th century guitarists pedagogy go about it. In the Baroque era and into the classical era, people recognized that different fingers had different strengths, and they used that to their advantage. If you think about speech, we don't speak with the same emphasis on every syllable. We become a little less intelligible that way. So the idea of relating music and speech was all around the Baroque era, and people used the strong, weak aspects of their physiology to emphasize that in the music. So this also applies to you bowed string players. The down bow on a Baroque bow is much stronger than an up bow on a Baroque bow. So we can think about strong, weak in a lot of different situations with bowing, with fingerings, things like that. This also applies to harmony. There has to be a strong harmony that goes to a weak harmony, and then back to a strong harmony, and this whole idea of tension and resolution. So in measure 4 and 5 and into 6, what are your tense harmonies? What are your resolution harmonies? Okay. Again, you could come up with any particular answer and probably make it convincing. I would say, personally, the first half of 4, which is you can see as one harmony, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit stronger than the second half of measure 4.
Okay.
Then measure 5, the first half's a little stronger than the second half of 5.
Okay.
I'd probably come to that conclusion based on tessitura. Often we want to think about stuff that's high up in our range is a little bit stronger than stuff that's low in our range, especially if you think about the instrument that this would have been played on, a lute, which can have a very powerful bass range if you have a big lute, but this was probably played on a smaller lute, which had a kind of a puny bass range. So that puts a little bit more of a pejorative term on it, but Vivaldi probably used that to his advantage. Stuff that was lower was for the soft stuff. So let's do from the beginning again with the idea of strong and weak harmonies in measures 4 or 5 into 6. And then can you actually continue on, and we're going to stop at measure, actually we'll go all the way through the exposition, so we'll stop at the downbeat of 12. Excellent. Great. I loved your rendition of measures 4, 5, and 6. I thought that was just much more interesting. And it, just gave me as a listener another way to hear that same melodic figure that Vivaldi's hammering home. All right, and then we get into the stuff in measure 6, the move to the minor. So this is also typical of a Vivaldi opener, where he tries to introduce a lot of the material he's going to use throughout the movement in the first exposition, the first 12, 16 bars. So here's our little minor section here. Can you try and set that off a little bit more by thinking of a different, what we call affect, or a different character, a different mood? This is a pretty drastic change to D minor. So I think, changes in dynamics, the editor says piano there, that might be a good idea. Changes on articulation probably would be really welcome. It's also the first time we're hearing new material since the, opening notes. So it's a pretty special moment. Let's see if you can set that off. Maybe starting in measure 4 again, and then go into that minor section.
Okay.
Great. Yeah. So you kind of lengthened a little bit in the first melodic material of the minor section, which I think is really appropriate. And I loved your slink upwards, the chromatic scale upwards. That was really nice. I wonder if you can maybe give a little bit more crescendo to that. And I don't know, make it seem like it's a little bit harder to do that scale. I know it's on a fretted instrument, it's actually very easy to play half steps because you just go to the next fret. But there are plenty of writers in the Baroque era who suggest that you should, on like a violin or a cello, play an E flat and an E natural, or an F natural and an F sharp with the exact same finger, kind of knowing that you're not going to get a perfect half step, but kind of making the chromatic scale a little bit painful, intentionally painful. So can you, even though it's very easy on a fretted instrument, can you still kind of fake this idea that it's actually hard and painful to get that chromatic scale to come out? So let's start in the minor section again. I also want to say in measure 10, those 3 chords in a row, exact same chords, but they cannot be played the exact same way. So think about strong weaks. What are you going to play strong? What are you going to play weak in that measure?
Okay. Question about making the chromatic scale seem hard. Do you want me to change the fingering then?
Oh, no, you don't have to change the fingering. I think maybe changing your approach, I don't know. Maybe holding some of the notes a little bit longer, making it kind of more of a slide up than a, the frets kind of separate the half steps very evenly for us. And I want to kind of hear more of a slide. Maybe that means playing the second note of the pair into the change note a little bit longer. I'm not quite sure what you can do. But let's just start by thinking very legato in that section with the crescendo.
I could play like a short glissando into them.
Maybe, yeah.
Right. Okay. I think I'm going to add an A then to the last in measure 10.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to start from 4, or do you want me to start from 6?
6, just the minor section, yeah. Okay. Pick up into 3.
All right.
Excellent. I thought the crescendo in 10 was really effective. Good. Yeah, I think that's on the right track with the chromatic scale. with you adding that A and 10 and this chromatic scale we're talking about, I just want to make sure you're aware about this addition. The Vivaldi score only has the top line of this edition. It only has the melody notes. So the bass notes you're playing here are kind of intended to let you play it by yourself and still hear harmony. But at any point, either if there's too many of the lower notes, I would drop them. Also, if there's not enough of the lower notes, feel free to add them, because the lute was a continuo instrument, which meant that all lutenists could improvise a little bit, or at least understood how to add harmony. So if you want to, add a bass note here or there for emphasis, that's great. Also, if you want to take away bass notes, know that your colleagues on the bass line will be covering it. And especially as a guitarist in that solo section, you're not actually adding much sound, because the orchestra is going to be pretty loud at that point. So if it ever is too much for your hand, if you could make a melodic line a little bit more effective by dropping it, please feel free to.
Okay. Adam, I just have a question about continuo in this piece. So what's your take on whether to have cembalo added to this or not?
I think it depends on the situation. Whether you're having a big concert hall, if the guitar is going to be amplified or not. I do think there should be continuo of some sort. Harpsichord is great. Organ is really nice, because the organ has such a different timbre than the guitar. You have the sustain notes and it's all sustain, whereas the guitar has all the front end of a note. Other guitars would be a good continuo. I do think it would kind of miss a chordal instrument if you didn't have it. That being said, especially once we get to the second movement, I've heard renditions where there's no continuo at all, just a bass line, even a pizzicato bass line, and it sounds gorgeous. So it really just depends on if you're going to amplify, Alex, and what the size of the hall is, I think.
Okay. I mean, the size of the halls it'll be our biggest hall, Bailey Hall, in our but in terms of, we don't have access to organ in that hall, so we would have to have a sort of electronic version of that. So, but we could have a harpsichord brought in to Bailey Hall. Okay. Yeah. So that's just a question I had about it.
Is amplification possible for Alex?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Then I think harpsichord would be fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll be fine with harpsichord as long as Alex can be heard over it. Yeah. It's not so much being heard, it's kind of falling into the cracks, the same plucked,
sort of
plucked sound.
Wavelength of original sound. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, Alex, so we just got through the exposition. So this is stuff that you're playing all with the violins. You're being doubled verbatim by the violins. And then we get into your solo section. So this is measure 12. Could you pick it up from there?
Do you want me to start on the first beat, or do you want me to the first beat, or do you want me to start after
You can do pick up to 3. Yeah, pick up to 3. Beat 3.
Okay.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, you can stop there. That's good. So already, in a concerto type setting, it's the soloist's job to kind of change things, to direct the orchestra to something else. And already in just your first 2 beats, you've changed it. It's not the exact same figure. It's the figure and then the figure up a third, which is very interesting. I wonder if you can have a little bit more of a conversation with yourself in that section. So thinking the end of 12 and the first half of 13 is one idea, and then you kind of respond to yourself or expand on yourself second half of 13 into 14.
Wait, could you say that again?
Yeah, so you kind of start a figure the second half of 12, right? Yada da 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 da.
Yeah.
And then the next 4 beats are kind of a response to that, the exact same thing, but on a different harmony. Da 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 da. So can you maybe a little bit of a breath in the middle of 13, and just kind of have a little bit of a dialogue with yourself in that. Know that the figures on the tonic are different than the figures on the dominant.
Okay, you want a breath in the middle of 13?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Can you do it without taking time? So if I sing it da 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 da.
Oh, so without time.
Without time.
Okay.
I think this also means that you're going to have to underplay those repeated A's in 13, because they're not melodic at that point.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Great. And I love the dynamics you were doing. I mean, it's tough to tell dynamics over Zoom, but what I heard was that you started coming down at end of 15 into 16. And then by 17, you were crescendoing into the downbeat of 18. I think that's the absolute right move, because here we are going to a different tonic, and that's a big deal. Great. Pick it up again at 19. Let's keep an eye on our time.
So just one question, Adam. I think one of the things that I find really important in approaching Vivaldi and Baroque music is the weight distribution of notes. So strong beat, weak beat, but also as you're trying to coach Alex, there are times when you have to let go of some notes because they're not really important. And I think if we try to make everything sort of at the same level, then we lose the perspective of the important notes. So what are some ways in this particular phrase we can give Alex and the orchestra members a way to determine what are the important notes and what are less important notes that we can sort of let go to highlight the notes that are important?
Sure. So that's great point. The strong weaks has everything to do with what's important, what's not important. They actually called it good and bad notes often in the Baroque era, so they actually put a value judgment on it. A few clues that you can look into, especially in this phrase. If you see a lot of repeated notes, are they adding anything is kind of the question. So looking at Alex's part, in 13, we have 3 A's in a row, starting on the and of 1, right? And that's not particularly important. That's basically just adding, I don't want to say it's not important, but it's not important to the syntax of the music. It's adding rhythm, it's adding energy, but it's not adding melody, which is kind of the thing that determines good or bad notes. Maybe you could play that once, Alex, from the middle of 12 and really de-emphasize those repeated A's in 13.
Yep.
Good. So if those repeated A's are the ones you're de-emphasizing, and that's the first little phraselet. In the second phraselet, what are the notes you're de-emphasizing?
Could you say it again?
So in the first little phraselet, the end of 12 and the beginning of 13, you're de-emphasizing the repeated A's.
Yeah.
What's the parallel spot in the next phraselet? What are the notes that you're de-emphasizing?
The 2 D's and the A.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the A is melodic, but at least the 2 D's for sure. And then the same thing continues, the first half of 15. That's a pretty cool trick that he's doing, and it adds a lot of rhythmic energy, but it's not melodic in the same way. And Alex, I don't know if you have a score in front of you, but I I know, well, there's one on Zoom, that's right. If you look at the cello part at that time or the continuo part, they don't have strictly repeated notes necessarily. It's, they do before that, but here it's actually a pretty interesting walking bass line. At the same time, you still have to figure out what to emphasize and what to de-emphasize. So if I'm thinking of that bass line, it's mostly on the harmony changes, or 1 and 3 would be my go-tos. And then the rest you have to figure out how to articulate. In this typical bass line, you would probably connect the first 2 notes and then kind of separate the last 2 notes. So the bass line should go so just thinking about good and bad notes in terms of really just the strong and weak parts of the beat is a really good default. You don't even have to think about tricks to do with the melody and what's a melody, what's a harmony note. Just knowing what a strong beat is and the off beats are the weak parts of the beat. A good default.
All right.
Great. I want to give you a chance. Actually, maybe we'll skip ahead to the second half of this movement. I just want to talk a little bit about your arpeggio section. How do you think about that?
I actually am not sure what I'm supposed to be doing for the arpeggiate section, so I just kind of mimicked what I was doing with the arpeggio before that.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good default. Yeah, it's not a wrong answer for sure. To just continue the pattern that was already started. I do think that this is kind of a different harmonic motion. It's it has a lot of stasis in this moment. So you might consider doing something different. It's a little less melodic than what came before it. So maybe something different would be warranted.
Okay.
You could even subdivide it in 16th notes if you wanted, just like a PIM or PIAI. PIAI is probably what I would do.
PIAI, PIA?
PIAI, PIAI. And 16th notes, so that gives you the 2 full beats.
Okay. I talked to the other teacher about this, and you said that I should play it on the first run through, but do something different for the second.
Great. So that might be a good thing to do for the second, doing the 16th notes.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea. Can we pick it up at measure 35? And I want you to think about what we talked about just recently about repeated notes and strong and weak beats, how that affects what you play at 35. And then also think about tessitura, how that affects how strong or how loud and how soft you're playing something.
Okay, you want it 35 to?
Till downbeat of 41.
Okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Give me a sec. I'm supposed to de-emphasize the high Bs, right?
Yeah, the repeated high Bs.
That's what I'm trying to, okay.
Yeah. Nice. So great job de-emphasizing those Bs. I would also say because 38 is the exact same thing, just down an octave, at least once you get to the end of 38.
Yeah.
That's probably should be kind of an echo of what came before it.
Okay.
You could also do the opposite, but they definitely shouldn't be the same volume.
Okay. So what I have written in is for the arpeggio section, I have piano. So for 35 to, excuse me. So for 35 to like 37, I could play that forte, and then for 38 to 40, I could play that piano again.
I think so, yeah, with your own little phrasing in between. But
Okay.
yes, those are the general dynamics, I think.
Gotcha.
So Adam, I have two questions regarding that. So whenever we have these echo effects, these are should be reflected in the orchestral parts as well, right? So if Alex is going for a forte 35 to 37, and then the next echo phrase 38 to 40, then whoever is playing the cello accompanying part should reflect that dynamic as well, correct?
Absolutely. And let me just see the exact cello part, because actually the cellist might be able to help set that off. Let's see. Oh, it's actually the violins there who have the very end of measure 37. So maybe they're the ones that really start the piano there. And in that way, kind of lead Alex to play his moment piano.
Okay. And then,
so yeah, absolutely.
And then the second question regarding whenever a section repeats, so previously when you had this arpeggio section, maybe the second time Alex does something different. In terms of repeats for the orchestral accompaniment when it repeats, should they be worrying about ornamenting or not?
They could probably add embellishments if they wanted to, little trills here and there, but actual like really Italianate ornamenting, which we're going to get into, we're going to move to the second movement now, is probably something you want to stay away from as an orchestral player.
Right.
You know, maybe a trill here and there might add, especially on those held notes, but not much more than trills, I don't think.
Yeah, maybe a good sort of analogy would be like a drummer in a jazz band is playing, and then maybe end of the phrase sort of do a little fill to embellish, but not get in the way of the solo in terms of during the trumpet solo, the tenor sax solo, of going too crazy with embellishments. It's detracting from the solo line. Agreed.
And in this particular concerto, the lute is always playing with the violin, so there's no true ripieno part, unfortunately, for the violins. In other concerti, you know, maybe you'd be able to do more because the soloist is sitting out. But if you try to do too much in this concerto, you're certainly going to show up.
Okay.
Great. And last little thing, Alex, before we move on to the second movement. So we talked about how this addition, you know, adds notes and takes notes away. So the very last measure of this movement, you know, find a fingering, a voicing that fits easily, and do not be shy. You know, strum your cowboy chords. There's no problem there. That's going to be a way more effective ending than having your nice voice leading at the end, especially since that it's not original anyway. So you might as well change it to something that's comfortable for you.
Actually, for the ending, I did have an idea for something that would be kind of flashy as a way to end the first bit. So you see the repeated. So something that I worked a little bit on was cutting the bass notes just on the last iteration of it, and then just playing it with one hand, which would be a lot easier to do when you're amplified, as kind of like a really flashy way to sort of like end the piece.
Sure. Yeah. I'm all for cutting the bass notes here and there, especially if it, you know, you feel like it adds something. Do not hesitate to do that.
All right.
Great. Can we go on to the second movement? Yep. And could you play, we'll try to get to the whole thing, but I just want to make sure we have time to talk about big concepts. Could you play the A section once plainly and then repeat it with any ornaments or embellishments you have?
Okay. Yeah.
And then we'll probably stop there and do the B section separately.
Okay. I do have one question about ornaments though. How appropriate are like glissandos and slides? I talked to a couple different people about this, and it seemed to be kind of a controversial idea. Some people said that it was like anti-Vivaldi, and then others were like, but it's guitar, so do it.
That's funny that you say anti-Vivaldi, because there are plenty of sources that, violin sources that have glissandi. We have a lot of accounts of portamenti being added in vocal and violin lines. But to us modern listeners, that sounds very 19th century. So we think it's totally not what they did in the Baroque. It very well might be what they did. So if you can do it convincingly, it's not wrong. You could definitely back it up with sources. Whether it detracts from your interpretation, that is something to consider. You know, a nice ornament, a nice planned ornament, you know, people understand the syntax of that. You throw in a bend here or there, and all of a sudden the listener's mind goes to the bend and is not thinking about the music. So I would say anything is fair game as long as you're serving the music. You know, convince me. I'm willing to hear it. Absolutely.
All right.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Awesome. And this is the tempo. Such a leading question. This is the tempo you've decided on? Have you thought about tempo for this?
I've thought about it a little bit. I'm thinking probably about 45 beats per minute. It's supposed to be like between, someone told me it's supposed to be somewhere between like 40 and 60. That's what Largo is considered.
Okay. I would say this is on the faster side. I'm going to pick up a guitar here because I want to talk about ornaments. The reason I think it's on the faster side, maybe the tempo is fine, but I do think it needs to sound a little bit more expansive, a little bit heavier. Maybe that means taking the dotted 8/16 a little less literally, maybe thinking of a more closer to triplets and less dotted 8/16. Right now it's sounding a little martial, which I don't think is the character of the piece. Okay. I also think, you know, the tempo depends on how much you're going to ornament on the second time around. You know, the slower you can go, the more ornaments you can add. And I've been trying to get my hands on this, but you know who Corelli is? So he's the almost immediate predecessor to Vivaldi. He was in Rome, but kind of, you know, Vivaldi heard a lot of his music and learned from him for sure. Corelli wrote Concerti Grossi and a lot of violin sonatas. And there's a publication of his own ornaments on Largo, on, you know, slower movements, which you should check out to see exactly what people right around 1700 were doing to ornament. But so that was published at the time of Corelli, 1700. And it was so popular, it kept getting published, you know, at least every 10, 20 years. And by the end of the 18th century, there were so many ornaments going on in one measure of Corelli that you knew the tempo had to have gotten slower and slower as time went on, because there just wouldn't have been any room to play the ornaments otherwise. So I think you could justify a slower tempo if you added more ornaments. And what I mean by ornaments, mostly what you added the second time around, I would more categorize as embellishments. Little small additions to the written music. Little trills, even your glissandi, which I thought fit perfectly. I didn't mind them one bit. Those are really just very minute on the note ornaments. Ornaments and ornamentation in the Italian style, and you'll see this when you look at Corelli. Definitely violinists listening right now, check out Corelli Opus 5, the Roger edition, which for a few of them has all of these ornaments written on slow movements. And you can see it's just like a wavelength up and down of constant notes here and there, sometimes following exactly what's on the page and sometimes not. So for instance, if we start, so that's it clean, right? Adding more Corelli style ornaments would be, so still following the contours, but filling in leaps, going up and down, sometimes doing actually opposite motion from what you see there. But it's definitely filling in a lot more than just adding a grace here or there. I think whether you do it in performance or not, it is informative, and it definitely gets you into the style. So I would play around with it. You're able to play the bass line by yourself so you can hear the harmonies, and just play around and see what licks you can add yourself. If you need inspiration, check out Corelli. Another great source would be Telemann's methodical sonatas or methodical studies. They're flute pieces, but it's the same idea. He has 3 staves, the bass line, the plain flute line, and then the ornamented version of the flute line. So you can see exactly what he does.
So when so when I'm like adding ornaments, I'm not thinking, oh, add like little trills. I'm thinking like jazz improvisation levels of ornaments almost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would really encourage all of our string players, in fact, all our instrumentalists, to explore the flute treaties of Telemann and Corelli ornamentations, because it really opens up your expressivity. And this is one of the avenues in which you can start to improvise on your instruments as well.
Absolutely. And then while you're doing that improvisation, keep your good strong weaks in mind. So I don't know if you caught it, but there's that circle of fifths progression again in 3 and 4 and into 5. So figure out which harmonies you want to emphasize, which ones you don't. And the same thing we talked about with the first movement, maybe repetitive or repeated notes. Don't emphasize as much. Keep that more as a rhythmic thing and not a melodic thing. I would like to point out, just to clean it up, measure 7, make sure you're counting that correctly, landing on beat 3 correctly.
Oh, did I play 3?
I think it was 1/8 note short.
Yep.
Those ornaments also, I think you can think about them in measure 8 as well. So if we get to the end of the A section, and you can really bring the orchestra back in for the repeat by adding something. Another way of doing it is to just kind of riff on that harmony. Something to fill the time. You don't always have to be hearing a note. You don't always have to fill the time, but depending on your tempo, you might feel like it's a long time if you're not actually arpeggiating or leading into the next section somehow.
Okay.
Maybe we just have enough time to hear the second half of this, and then we'll go on to a Q&A section.
Do you want me to play with some, like, I'm assuming, words are hard. Do you want me to add the embellishments, and I do actually have a couple actual ornaments written in.
Great. Yeah, let's play it as if it's the second time. That's
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. Also, just a heads up, but at the end of measure 10 with the 30 seconds and the transition to the 30 seconds in measure 11, I haven't quite figured out the best way to do that yet.
Okay.
So if you have any
about that.
suggestions for how to fix that, I would really appreciate it.
Great.
Right.
Yeah, let's hear it now. I'll offer some insight.
All right. Sorry, give me a sec.
Very nice. Great. So just 2 quick points about that. Your 30-second note tempo, I think, is pretty close to the right tempo of this whole second movement. But you take it at a different tempo than you do like the opening, for instance. Can you just play that one of the 30-second note sections? Maybe the first one?
Yeah. Do I have the right measure?
So it's a little slower than you started the movement, and I think it's closer to the right tempo. So maybe take your cues off the 30-second notes about what tempo this whole movement should be. And with that, right now it's sounding a little bit of a machine gun. It's just, you've practiced it very well, which is great. But to get the syntax of it, maybe lengthen the beats a little bit. Yeah, yeah, da 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 da, yeah, da 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 da, yeah. The B to C sharp in the 30-second notes, they're not technically repeated notes, but they act the same way. It's like a written out trill. So it's all about the notes on the beat in those sections.
Okay.
And then last point to make is that stuff in 14 and 15. So your strong weaks, apply them here. So it's a strong A in 14, a weak B, and then a strong but not quite as strong A, and a weak G. Another way to think about it is to pair. So da da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba. Thinking more in twos rather than individual notes, which is how it's coming out now.
Oh, okay.
And your ornament in beat 3, it's kind of adding, it's adding an 8th note. So make sure your ornaments fit in with the beat.
Okay. About the ornament in beat 3, the way that my teacher told me to change it is to take the 2 16th notes there and turn it into 4 30-second notes. Yeah,
I think you played them as 16th notes though.
I did.
And then I think that added an 8th note. So, So da 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 da. It's a very quick. Yeah, not quite fast enough. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Good.
Can I just slur that entire thing then?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're your ornaments, right?
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think just take the edge off the tempo, and that'll, I think you'll have fun adding the ornaments in there. Check out Corelli, check out Telemann, and see if you can kind of add your own lines, and maybe that can inform the affect of this piece, which should be, it should be pretty mellow. Okay. Great to hear you. I'm excited to hear how this performance goes. So definitely keep me in the loop. I want to hear what you guys are doing.
Yeah. So I think we have a little bit of time. So let's have our videos on, everybody. And I'll go to gallery view. I'll remove the pins. If you have any particular questions, let's ask Adam. I think one of the things that I always do try to emphasize about the strong beat, weak beat. Adam, maybe you can say a few words to us about, in a 4/4 pattern, in the Baroque era, what would have been the expectations of musicians approaching a 4/4 bar in terms of what beats are strong, weak, and what happens to phrases that inhabit those spaces?
Sure. So probably similar to what you would expect, but in a 4/4 bar, beats 1 and 3 are kind of the king. Depends on the level of subdivision you have. So if everything is mostly in eighth notes, then 2 and 4 also get some emphasis. If you're in a largo section like we just saw with the second movement, maybe all of those eighth notes are actually strong beats, and it's the 16th notes on the offbeat that are weak. So you have to understand the context of how many subdivisions you're dealing with. And I'll say that is one level of strong to weak, just the rhythmic aspect. Everyone in the Baroque era trained in some type of chordal instrument, at least at a basic level. So everyone understood the harmonic syntax as well. So for instance, we saw some of these chains of sevenths, the circle of fifths motion. So in those cases, maybe your strong weaks get thrown off by a beat or 2 beats based on the harmony. So there's another context to kind of analyze this within. And then things we talked about, tessitura, maybe whether it's major or minor or a dominant or tonic harmony, these all inform what the strong and weak motion is like. But on a very basic rhythmic level, 1 and 3 are your strong beats. It goes down in levels from there. Also helpful, just because I know many of you will play some dance suites, whether it's Bach or someone else, knowing what the strong and weak beats were for that particular dance. So I'm thinking, in a typical 3/4 bar, if you're thinking of minuet, the strong beat is on 1. If you're thinking a sarabande, we don't want to accent beat 2, but the idea that the second beat gets a little bit more weight than the first beat is a characteristic of that particular dance. And that's another thing that every musician would have trained in is dance. So knowing that context as well, whether there's a dance being explicitly mentioned or just kind of in reference, can really, really help inform your strong, weak interpretation.
All right, so I won't say anything more. Please, we do have a few minutes, so go ahead, everybody. You can use the raise your hand feature, or just raise your hand and ask a question. Irene, go ahead.
I was wondering how you structure your practice times, like how many minutes you use for warm-ups and how many hours you use for techniques and on the pieces.
Great question. That's something that has definitely changed over the course of my career. These days, I spend a lot more time warming up than I used to. I kind of was able to just dive right into technique when I was younger. But nowadays I spend at least 15 minutes, 20 minutes warming up, both because I think just getting the hands feeling right and not tense is important. I also play a lot of different instruments, depending on the repertoire, theorbo, lute, baroque guitar. So getting to know the instrument as well is always helpful. But I think when I was in college, it was really, if I was practicing 4 hours a day, an hour of it was on technique, just so that I could get, kind of a baseline set of tools to use in whenever I needed it. And technique is not just, the physical act of, slurs or bow staccato or things like that. I also consider something like practicing improvisation a technique, even though that's more of a mind thing than an actual physical thing. But those are really important to play through ornaments, like we were talking about today. Sight reading, I think, is also a really important technique that we need to practice every day. Just stuff that happens all the time apart from repertoire. But I think you'll all find that warming up, finding a good warm-up routine will serve you really well in the future. So I encourage you to start that early on, finding something that you can rely on.
And I'm really glad you said, Adam, because especially if you, in this time of quarantine where we haven't had regular orchestra rehearsals, it's really important to take care of your body in terms of the physical demand that each of your instruments calls for. So I've often been so surprised by musicians who think about, they'll go for a run and then they'll spend 15 minutes stretching before their run, but they'll jump right into a Don Juan excerpt, and it's like your body is going to be stressed out if you don't take care of it and warm up properly.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up the session. Well, Adam, we'll be sure to give you updates about our progress in the Vivaldi. And thank you so much for taking Alex through the ringers in the masterclass. And we really appreciate your insight on Vivaldi and Baroque playing. Let's take a group photo. So everybody turn your videos on if you have it off. I'll take 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you so much. Just a reminder about next week, we have a very special guest, Carl Sinclair, who's the music director of the Pacific Symphony, as our guest speaker, and that'll be a combined session on the Monday, March 22, 4:45 to 5:45 time slot. We are looking for student moderators for that, so if you're interested, just send me an email. And then also next Tuesday, the 23rd, will be a broadcast of the Festival of Solo Works by Underrepresented Composers. So that'll be going out at 7 p.m. and I believe I sent the link out on Canvas. But be sure to look for next week's schedule on Sunday evening. Okay? All right. Take care.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.